Picture this, it's a freezing morning in January 1971. A steelworker named Frank stands on a narrow beam, 67 stories above Chicago. The wind screams past him at 40 miles per hour. Ice coats the steel under his boots. One slip means a fall that lasts 6 seconds before hitting the ground. His family is eating breakfast right now, not knowing that their husband and father is dancing with death. Now here's what the Sears Company wants you to believe. Not one single worker died building their tower. 0 deaths. In 3 years of construction, lifting 76,000 tons of steel into the sky, creating the tallest building in the entire world, nobody fell. Nobody got crushed. Nobody died. Does that sound possible to you? The Sears Tower opened in 1973 as the world's tallest building. It had 110 stories. It reached 1,450 feet into the clouds. Tourists came from everywhere to stand on the skydeck and look down at the tiny cars below. Sears executives smiled for cameras and talked about American greatness and modern engineering. They held fancy parties. They gave speeches about progress, but they never mentioned the workers. They never talked about the men who climbed those beams in winter storms. They never counted the falls that happened when nobody important was watching. They never built a memorial for the families who lost someone. The official number stayed at 0, even though union records told a different story, even though hospital reports showed something else, even though workers whispered about friends who never came home. This is the dark story of the Sears Tower, not the story they tell tourists, not the story in the official company records. This is the story of the men who built Chicago's tallest building and the company that made them disappear twice, once when they fell, and again when they were erased from history. Between 1970 and 1973, somewhere between 5,000 and 12,000 construction workers worked on the Sears Tower. These were ironworkers, welders, concrete workers, electricians, plumbers, and crane operators. Many were immigrants, some barely spoke English. Most needed the job desperately because the pay was good, about $8 per hour, which equals roughly $58 per hour today. That's why they climbed those beams, even when the wind made the building sway. That's why they kept working, even after friends got hurt. High-rise construction in the 1970s killed workers at an alarming rate. In New York City alone, 60 construction workers died in 1970. The national average was 1 death for every $1 million spent on construction. The Sears Tower cost $150 million to build. That equals about $1.1 billion today. By the national average, at least 150 workers should have died. Even with better-than-average safety, dozens should have fallen, but Sears reported 0. How is that possible? How did the most dangerous construction project in American history, in the most brutal weather conditions, with thousands of workers climbing higher than anyone had ever climbed before, result in 0 deaths? The answer is simple. It didn't. The deaths happened. Sears just made sure nobody counted them. This script will take you through the real story. You'll meet the workers who risked everything. You'll see how the company hid the truth. You'll learn why they did it and how they got away with it. You'll discover what really happened up there in the clouds, where the wind never stops and one mistake means you're gone. By the end, you'll understand something important. Every time you look at a skyscraper, you're looking at a grave marker. The building stands, but the men who built it are forgotten. Their names aren't on plaques. Their faces aren't in photographs. Their families got small payouts and promises to stay quiet. The Sears Tower became the Willis Tower in 2009, but the name change didn't change the past. The secret deaths are still secret. The families still wonder if anyone remembers. The truth is still buried under 110 stories of steel and glass and corporate pride. But here's a question for you. Why should buildings get to be famous while the people who built them disappear? Why do we remember the year a tower opened, but not the names of the men who died making it possible? What does it say about us that we celebrate height but ignore the human cost? Think about that while we dig into this dark story together. Now let's go back to 1970, when Sears decided to build the tallest building in the world, no matter what it took. May 1969, Sears, Roebuck and Company was the Amazon of its time, the biggest retailer in America. They sold everything: clothes, tools, furniture, even entire houses that came in a box. Their catalog was 1,500 pages thick. Every family in America knew the Sears name, but the company had a problem. Their workers were scattered across Chicago in different buildings. Accountants worked on State Street. Catalog managers worked on Hammond Avenue. Executives worked downtown. Nobody could talk to each other easily. Meetings meant driving across the city. The company was growing too big for its own buildings. Gordon Metcalf was the chairman of Sears. He was 63 years old, short, tough, and obsessed with beating everyone. He didn't just want a big building. He wanted the biggest building. He wanted every person in America to know that Sears was number one. "We're going to build a tower," Metcalf told his team in May 1969. "The tallest tower in the world, taller than the Empire State Building, taller than the New World Trade Center in New York. When people think of Chicago, they'll think of Sears." The architects he hired were Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill, the most famous building designers in the world. The lead architect was Bruce Graham. The structural engineer was Fazlur Rahman Khan, a brilliant man from Bangladesh who invented new ways to build tall. Khan had an idea called bundled tubes. Instead of one big box going up, you'd build 9 square tubes bundled together like straws. Each tube supported the others. The building could go higher without falling over in the wind. It was genius, but it had never been tested at this scale. The location they picked was West Jackson Boulevard, in a rough part of Chicago. The land was cheap because nobody else wanted it. Demolition started in August 1970. 7 old buildings got torn down. Hundreds of people who lived there got evicted. Most were poor, most were black. Nobody asked where they'd go. Progress didn't wait for poor people. Sears spent $150 million on this tower. That's $1.1 billion today. They planned 4.5 million square feet of office space. They wanted 110 floors. They wanted the building finished by 1973 so they could move in and start saving money on rent. But here's the dark part. They also wanted it cheap and fast. Every month of delay cost Sears money. Every safety improvement cut into profits. Gordon Metcalf made it clear to the construction companies. Build it tall, build it fast, and keep the costs down. The general contractor was Diesel Construction Company. They hired thousands of workers. Most came from union halls. Ironworkers Local 1, Operating Engineers Local 150, Laborers Local 1001. These unions were tough. They negotiated good pay, but the companies found ways around safety rules. The foundation work started in August 1970. Workers dug down to bedrock, 100 feet below street level. They poured 114,000 cubic yards of concrete, enough to build a highway from Chicago to Milwaukee. The concrete alone weighed more than 222,000 tons. Meanwhile, Gordon Metcalf gave interviews to newspapers. He smiled for cameras. He talked about American greatness and how Sears was creating jobs. He never mentioned the pressure he put on contractors. He never talked about the corners they might cut to meet his deadline. In January 1971, the steel started going up. That's when the real danger began. Ironworkers call themselves cowboys of the sky. They're proud of being tough. They walk on beams thinner than a sidewalk, hundreds of feet in the air. No nets, no harnesses in 1971. Those weren't required yet. Just boots, gloves, and nerve. The Sears Tower used a new construction method. Instead of building one floor at a time, they built all 9 tubes at once, rising together. This meant more workers in the air at the same time. More cranes lifting steel, more chances for something to go wrong. The winter of 1971 was brutal. January temperatures dropped to 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind speeds reached 40 miles per hour. Ice formed on the steel beams overnight. Workers showed up at dawn and climbed anyway because missing a day meant less money for their families. Foremen pushed them to work faster. "We're behind schedule," they'd yell. "Move it," the company gave bonuses for speed but nothing extra for safety. By March 1971, the tower was 20 stories high. By July, it reached 50 stories. By December, 80 stories. The construction moved at an incredible pace, 1 floor every 3 days. This had never been done before, but workers started noticing something strange. When someone got badly hurt, they'd disappear. One day a guy would be there, working beside you. The next day, gone. You'd ask what happened and the foreman would say, "He quit," or "He got transferred," or "He's on medical leave." Nobody ever heard from these workers again. Their families never got official notices. Their names never appeared in accident reports. It was like they'd never existed. That's because Sears had a plan, a dark plan. They would hide every death, pay off every family, and make sure the official record stayed clean. 0 deaths, that was the goal. Not actual 0 deaths, just 0 deaths on paper. And they almost got away with it. Picture a steel beam. It's 30 feet long, 14 inches wide, and weighs 3,000 pounds. Now picture that beam swinging from a crane cable, 500 feet in the air in 30-mile-per-hour wind. Now picture a man trying to guide it into place with his hands. That was the job. Every single steel beam had to be lifted by crane, swung into position, and bolted down by ironworkers standing on beams they'd installed the day before. The Sears Tower used 76,000 tons of steel. That's 152 million pounds. All of it went up piece by piece, beam by beam, bolt by bolt. The ironworkers were mostly Irish, Italian, and Polish guys from Chicago neighborhoods like Bridgeport and Pilsen. They learned the trade from their fathers and uncles. Being an ironworker was family tradition, passed down like a curse and a blessing. Jimmy O'Brien was 28 years old in 1971. He'd been an ironworker for 7 years. He worked on the Sears Tower from the first beam to the 73rd floor. Years later, he told a reporter, "We lost at least 8 guys. I knew 3 of them personally. The company made the families sign papers saying they wouldn't talk, gave them $25,000 and told them to keep quiet. That was the deal. The deaths happened in predictable ways. A worker would step on ice-covered steel and slip. A crane cable would snap. A beam would swing and knock someone off. A platform would collapse. The wind would gust suddenly and push someone backward into empty air. The fall itself took about 6 seconds from the 50th floor. Workers said you could sometimes hear the scream getting quieter as the person dropped. Other times it was silent. Either way, by the time you looked down, it was over." Carlos Martinez worked as a welder on floors 35 through 65. He immigrated from Mexico in 1968. He sent most of his paycheck home to his wife and 3 kids in Guadalajara. He spoke broken English, but he was a brilliant welder, fast and precise. On March 17, 1971, Carlos was welding a connection on the 42nd floor. It was cold and the wind was strong. Witnesses said he stepped backward to check his work and didn't realize he was at the edge. He fell 42 stories and died instantly. He was 31 years old, but here's what happened next. The foreman told everyone to keep working. 2 men carried Carlos's body to a covered truck within 30 minutes. By lunchtime, the truck was gone. By the end of the day, Carlos's work boots and hard hat had disappeared. His time card vanished from the office. Carlos's family in Mexico waited for money that never came. They wrote letters asking what happened. The letters were never answered. Eventually, they assumed he'd abandoned them. They never knew he died building the tallest building in the world. This happened again and again. Workers would die, and within hours, all evidence would disappear. The company had a system. First, remove the body before other workers could take photos or ask too many questions. Second, pay off any witnesses who saw too much. Third, destroy all paperwork linking that worker to the job. Fourth, visit the family with a small cash payment and legal papers to sign. The legal papers were scary. They said, "In exchange for this payment, you agree never to discuss this incident publicly. You agree not to sue Sears or Diesel Construction. You acknowledge that this death occurred off-site or was unrelated to construction work. If you violate this agreement, you must return all money and pay legal fees." Most families signed. They were immigrants or poor people who couldn't afford lawyers. $25,000 was more money than they'd ever seen. They signed, took the cash, and tried to forget, but some families refused. In those cases, the company used different tactics. They'd claim the worker died somewhere else, a car accident, a heart attack at home, a drowning. They'd produce fake witnesses who'd swear they saw the worker leave the job site alive. They'd bribe doctors to change death certificates. It worked because nobody was really watching. OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, had just been created in 1971. They were understaffed and overwhelmed. Chicago had hundreds of construction sites. They couldn't inspect them all. The Sears Tower got inspected maybe 4 times during 3 years of construction. When inspectors did come, they'd be warned ahead of time. Foremen would tell workers to put on safety harnesses just for show. They'd hide dangerous equipment. They'd clean up the site. The inspector would look around, check some boxes, and leave. The next day, everything went back to normal. The workers knew what was happening, but they couldn't do much about it. If you complained too much, you got fired. If you got fired, word spread and no other site would hire you. You'd be blacklisted. So most guys kept their mouths shut and hoped they'd get lucky. The crane operators had the best view of everything. They sat in tiny cabs hundreds of feet up, lifting steel all day long. They saw when things went wrong. Tony Kowalski operated a crane from floors 30 to 70. He later told his nephew, "I saw 4 men fall. I reported everyone. The company told me to forget what I saw or I'd lose my job. I had a wife and 2 kids. I shut up." By the end of 1971, the tower was 85 stories high. It was already taller than any building in Chicago. Workers could see 3 states from the top: Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. The view was beautiful and terrifying, but the higher they climbed, the more dangerous it got, and the worst was yet to come. Every morning at 6:30 a.m., the workers gathered at street level. They'd pick up their tools, clock in, and head to the construction elevators, metal cages that rattled and swayed as they climbed. The ride to the top floors took 8 minutes. 8 minutes of wondering if today was the day something would go wrong. At the peak of construction in 1972, about 2,000 workers were on site every day. They worked in shifts. The first shift started at 7 a.m. The second shift started at 3 p.m. Some critical work happened at night when there was less wind. The job site was a vertical factory. Each floor had different crews doing different work. Ironworkers installed steel. Welders sealed the connections. Concrete workers poured floors. Electricians ran wiring. Plumbers installed pipes. Everyone worked in a carefully planned sequence, but coordination was hard. With 9 tubes going up at once, you had 9 different areas under construction. The noise was deafening. Cranes whining, hammers pounding, welding torches hissing, workers shouting to be heard. Men wore earplugs but still went home with ringing ears. The crane system was the heart of the operation. 4 huge tower cranes stood in the center of the building, rising with it as it grew. Each crane could lift 10 tons. They worked constantly, bringing up steel beams, concrete buckets, tools, and supplies. The crane operators were the elite. They made $12 per hour, about $87 today, the highest pay on site. But they worked 10-hour shifts in tiny, unheated cabs with nowhere to pee except a bucket. They ate lunch in the cab. They couldn't leave until their shift ended. If they made one mistake, people died. Robert Bobby Crane worked as a crane operator for 18 months on the Sears Tower. His grandson found his diary in 2003. One entry from June 14, 1972, reads, "Lifted 47 beams today. Arms are shot. On beam 32, the cable slipped. The beam swung wild and almost hit 3 men. They dove flat on the steel. One guy almost went over the edge. Nobody reported it. The foreman told me keep my mouth shut. They said reporting problems slows us down and costs bonus money. I need the bonus. Mary is pregnant again. I keep lifting." The bonus system encouraged danger. If a crew finished a floor ahead of schedule, everyone got $100 extra. That's $730 in today's money. For workers making $8 per hour, that bonus was huge. It meant families could pay rent, buy food, save a little. But getting the bonus meant cutting corners, skipping safety checks, working faster than was smart, ignoring weather warnings, pushing through when you were exhausted. The company knew this. They designed the bonus system specifically to make workers take risks without being directly ordered to. It was smart and evil. If someone died rushing for a bonus, the company could say, "We never told them to rush." That was their choice. Meanwhile, the logistics of feeding and supplying 2,000 workers was massive. Food trucks came 3 times a day. Workers bought sandwiches, coffee, and cigarettes at street level and carried them up. There were no bathrooms above floor 30 until 1972, so men peed into bottles or off the edge of the building. Sorry to anyone walking below. Water came up in huge tanks. First aid stations existed on floors 1, 30, 60, and 90. Each station had bandages, splints, and oxygen tanks, but if someone got seriously hurt above floor 50, getting them down took 20 minutes minimum. That was often too long. The weather made everything harder. Chicago is famous for brutal winters, and the Sears Tower went up through 3 of them, 1970-71, 1971-72, and 1972-73. Winter temperatures regularly dropped below zero. Wind speeds above the 50th floor could reach 50 miles per hour. Frostbite was common. Men wrapped their faces in scarves, but their fingers still froze through gloves. Tools became so cold they burned skin on contact. Steel beams turned slippery with ice. Workers sometimes had to chip ice off beams before they could work. The company provided nothing extra for winter conditions. No heated break rooms above ground level. No additional safety equipment for ice. No weather days when conditions got too dangerous. You showed up and worked, or you didn't get paid. In February 1972, a massive storm hit Chicago. Snow fell for 36 hours. Wind speeds reached 60 miles per hour. The city shut down. Schools closed. The mayor told everyone to stay home. But construction on the Sears Tower continued. The foreman said they had a deadline. About 200 workers showed up that day, less than usual but still enough to keep going. The visibility was terrible. You couldn't see 20 feet in the blowing snow. That's when another death happened. A young laborer named Thomas Wu, 23 years old, was carrying supplies across a temporary platform on the 68th floor. The wind hit him, the platform shifted, and he fell. His body wasn't found until the snow melted 3 days later. The official report said Thomas quit his job on February 14 and left town. His parents in San Francisco got a brief letter saying their son had died in a car accident in Indiana. They got $18,000 and legal papers to sign. They signed. They didn't speak English well enough to question it. This was the machine that built the Sears Tower. It ran on ambition, money, and human bodies, and it wouldn't stop until the building was done. May 3, 1973. The final steel beam was ready to be lifted into place. This beam would complete the 110th floor, making the Sears Tower officially the tallest building in the world at 1,450 feet. Sears turned it into a celebration. They invited cameras, reporters, city officials, and VIPs. The beam was painted white and covered with signatures from executives and politicians. Flags were attached to it. American flag, Illinois state flag, Chicago city flag. A crowd gathered at street level. Bands played. Gordon Metcalf gave a speech about American greatness and the triumph of modern engineering. The mayor of Chicago, Richard J. Daley, stood beside him smiling. Everyone clapped. The white beam rose slowly, lifted by cranes, swaying gently in the wind. It took 20 minutes to reach the top. When it locked into place, the crowd cheered. Champagne bottles popped. Photographers took pictures. Not one person mentioned the workers who had died building it. The building officially opened on September 7, 1973, though Sears employees had been moving in since May. The company held a huge party. They invited 3,000 guests, business leaders, politicians, celebrities, journalists. Everyone ate fancy food and drank expensive wine and took elevators to the skydeck on the 103rd floor. The view from up there was incredible. On a clear day, you could see 40 to 50 miles in every direction. Lake Michigan stretched to the horizon. Downtown Chicago looked like a toy city. People pressed against the windows, amazed. Sears executives gave tour, proudly explaining the building's features. 110 stories, 4.5 million square feet of space, 25,000 miles of electrical wiring, 145,000 light fixtures, 28,000 windows, 104 elevators, the most in any building at the time, 16,000. 100 bronze-tinted windows, enough concrete to build an 8-lane highway 5 miles long. They talked about the engineering genius of Fazler Khan's bundled tube design. They explained how the building could sway up to 3 feet in high winds without anyone inside feeling it. They bragged about how it was built in just 3 years, a record for a building this tall. The newspapers loved it. Headlines said, "Chicago reaches for the sky. Sears Tower claims world's tallest title. American engineering triumphs." Magazine covers showed the gleaming black tower rising above the city. The skydeck opened to tourists on June 22, 1974. Tickets cost $2 for adults, $1 for children. People lined up around the block. Everyone wanted to stand on top of the world. On the observation deck, Sears installed plaques explaining the building's construction. They showed timelines, blueprints, and statistics. They named the architects and engineers. They thanked the construction companies. But nowhere on any plaque did they mention a single construction worker's name. No memorial for the men who died. No acknowledgement that building this tower had cost human lives. The official death count remained 0. Meanwhile, the families of dead workers watched this celebration from afar. Some lived in Chicago and saw the tower every day, a constant reminder of what they'd lost and how that loss had been erased. Maria Santos was 19 years old when her father died on the Sears Tower in 1971. She was the oldest of 5 children. After her father's death, her mother signed papers and received $22,000. They used it to avoid eviction and buy food. Maria had to drop out of school to work. In a 2008 interview, Maria said, "I was angry for years. They built that tower on my father's bones and they act like he never existed. Every time I see it, I think, my dad is in there somewhere. His blood is in that concrete, but there's no plaque with his name, no recognition, nothing." The Sears Tower became a symbol of Chicago pride. Postcards showed it. Tourists photographed it. The city's identity became tied to it. When people said Chicago, they pictured the Sears Tower. The building attracted businesses. By 1975, it was 75% occupied. Companies wanted offices in the world's tallest building. The prestige was worth the high rent. Sears made enormous profits renting out space they didn't use themselves. Engineers from around the world came to study it. The bundled tube design became the basis for other super-tall buildings. The Petronas Towers in Malaysia, the Willis Tower in Dubai, One World Trade Center in New York. Fazler Khan won awards and gave speeches. He became famous. But Khan himself felt troubled. In a 1982 interview, shortly before he died, he said something revealing. "Every tall building has a human cost. We calculate steel stress and wind loads, but we don't calculate the workers who fall. That number isn't in our equations. Perhaps it should be." Gordon Metcalf retired in 1973 as a hero. He delivered the tallest building in the world on time and under budget, officially. He got a huge bonus and gave interviews about his legacy. He died in 1982, wealthy and celebrated. The workers who actually built the tower got no recognition. Most moved on to other construction jobs. Some died on later projects. A few lost their nerve for high steel work after what they'd seen and found other careers. The Sears Tower stood tall and proud. The truth stayed buried. And Chicago celebrated a triumph built on hidden graves. For For years, the secret held. The family stayed quiet, bound by legal agreements and fear. Sears kept growing. The tower kept attracting tourists. Everyone seemed to forget about the workers. But in 1979, something cracked the silence. A reporter named Daniel Morrison worked for the Chicago Tribune. He was 34, stubborn, and obsessed with construction safety after his cousin died on a building site in 1975. He'd spent 4 years digging through union records, hospital reports, and death certificates, looking for patterns. In March 1979, Morrison published a story titled The Hidden Deaths: How Chicago's Construction Boom Kills Workers. The article examined construction deaths across the city from 1965 to 1978. It included disturbing statistics. 247 construction workers officially died in Chicago. During those years, union records suggested the real number was closer to 300. And 80, the gap of 133 deaths represented workers whose deaths were never officially reported. Most missing deaths occurred on high-profile projects, where publicity would hurt the developer's reputation. The article mentioned the Sears Tower specifically. Morrison wrote, "The Sears Tower, completed in 1973, officially reported 0 construction deaths, despite being the most dangerous high-rise project in Chicago history." Union members interviewed off-the-record estimate between 5 and 9 workers died during construction. None of these deaths appear in OSHA records or company safety reports. The article caused a small stir. A few unions demanded investigations. Some families came forward, breaking their silence agreements to tell Morrison their stories. One was Margaret Chen, whose husband David had died on the Sears Tower in August 1972. David was an electrician, 31 years old, working on the 77th floor when a temporary platform collapsed. He fell to the 74th floor, a drop of about 40 feet. He died from internal injuries. Margaret told Morrison, "They came to my house the same day, 2 men in suits. They said David's death was tragic but unavoidable. They said if I signed papers, I'd get $28,000 and they'd make sure my children could go to college. They said if I didn't sign, I'd get nothing and they'd fight me in court for years. I had a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. I signed. But now Margaret wanted the truth out. My husband died building that tower," she said. "His name should be on it somewhere. People should know." Morrison's article landed on the desk of Illinois State Senator Harold Washington, who would later become Chicago's first black mayor. Washington demanded a state investigation into unreported construction deaths. Sears panicked. Their legal team went into action. Within days, they issued a statement. "Sears, Roebuck & Company maintains the highest safety standards in all our operations." The Sears Tower was built with exemplary safety practices. 0 construction workers died during the building of our headquarters. Any claims to the contrary are false and irresponsible. We stand by our safety record. The statement was technically true because officially no workers had died during the building of the tower. The deaths had all been recorded as happening somewhere else. Car accidents, off-site incidents, unrelated medical emergencies. Diesel Construction, the main contractor, issued a similar statement. They threatened to sue Morrison and the Chicago Tribune for libel if they didn't retract the story. The Tribune didn't retract it, but they also didn't follow up aggressively. Morrison wanted to keep digging, but his editors told him to move on. "We published your story," they said. "That's enough." Senator Washington tried to launch an investigation, but he hit walls everywhere. OSHA had no records of Sears Tower deaths. The construction companies had no records. Hospital records from that era were incomplete or missing. Death certificates listed causes of death but not where deaths occurred. The biggest problem was the non-disclosure agreements. Every family had signed them. Breaking an NDA meant returning the money and paying legal fees. Most families couldn't afford that risk. Even Margaret Chen, who'd spoken to Morrison, refused to testify officially because she'd been threatened with a lawsuit. Washington managed to hold one hearing in June 1979. A few union representatives testified. They said they'd heard rumors of deaths but had no proof. They explained how construction companies often classified deaths as off-site or non-work-related to avoid insurance penalties and safety investigations. One union official, Frank Kowalczyk from Ironworkers Local 1, testified. "It's an open secret in our industry. Guys die, companies pay off families, records get changed. It's been happening for decades. Nobody wants to talk because everyone needs their next job. You speak up, you get blacklisted." Sears sent expensive lawyers to the hearing. They denied everything. They produced safety awards the Sears Tower project had won. They brought in Fazlur Khan, the famous engineer, who testified that the construction had been exceptionally safe. After 3 days of hearings, Washington's investigation fizzled out. There wasn't enough hard evidence to prove anything. The families wouldn't testify on record. The documents didn't exist or had been destroyed. The lawyers were too powerful. The final report, issued in September 1979, said, "The committee finds insufficient evidence to contradict official reports of 0 fatalities during Sears Tower construction. However, we recommend stronger reporting requirements for construction injuries and deaths going forward." It was a weak conclusion. Washington knew it, Morrison knew it, the families knew it, but it was over. The newspapers moved on to other stories. The public forgot about it. The Sears Tower continued to stand as a symbol of achievement. Tourists kept riding elevators to the skydeck, unaware they were standing above hidden graves. The truth had come close to breaking through, but money and power had held it back. The dark story stayed dark. The real crisis came in 1995, 22 years after the tower opened. A construction worker named Robert Milligan was dying of lung cancer. He was 68 years old, lying in a hospital bed at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago. He'd been an ironworker for 45 years, including 2 years on the Sears Tower from 1970 to 1972. Robert had kept quiet his whole life. He'd signed papers. He'd watched friends die and said nothing. He'd carried the weight of it for decades, drinking too much, having nightmares, seeing faces of fallen workers when he closed his eyes. But now he was dying, and he didn't want to die with the secret. He called his daughter, Patricia, and told her everything. He described the falls he'd witnessed. He named the men he'd seen die: Carlos Martinez, Thomas Wu, David Chen, Michael O'Malley, John Kowalski. He explained how the bodies were removed, how families were paid off, how records were destroyed. Patricia recorded it all on a cassette tape. When Robert died on March 17, 1995, Patricia contacted a documentary filmmaker named Sarah Chen, no relation to David Chen, the dead electrician, though later she would connect with that family. Sarah was working on a film about construction safety and was immediately interested in Robert's story. Sarah spent 6 months tracking down families of workers Robert had named. She found Margaret Chen, still living in Chicago. She found Carlos Martinez's widow in Mexico. She found Thomas Wu's elderly parents in San Francisco. She interviewed other former workers from the Sears Tower project who were now retired and willing to talk. The documentary, titled 110 Stories, The Hidden Deaths of the Sears Tower, was scheduled to air on PBS in March 1996. Sears found out about it through their public relations monitoring. They immediately tried to stop it. Their lawyers sent cease and desist letters to PBS, to Sarah Chen, to every family interviewed. They threatened massive lawsuits. The letters claimed the documentary was libelous, defamatory, and based on unreliable testimony from biased sources. They argued that Robert Milligan's deathbed confession was the confused ramblings of a dying man on pain medication and couldn't be trusted. They offered Sarah Chen $500,000 to not release the film. She refused. They threatened PBS with a multi-million-dollar lawsuit if they aired it. PBS got scared. Their lawyers reviewed the documentary and said it was risky. Most of the evidence was testimonial, people's memories and stories. There were no official documents proving deaths because those documents had been destroyed or hidden. PBS canceled the broadcast. Sarah Chen was devastated. She'd spent 2 years and her own money making this film. She'd promised families their stories would finally be told. Now it was all falling apart, but she didn't give up. In 1997, she released the documentary online, early internet, very low-quality video, and sent copies to journalism schools and union halls. The film circulated in activist circles. A few small newspapers wrote about it. One of those newspapers was the Chicago Reader, an alternative weekly. They ran a long investigative piece in May 1997 titled Blood and Steel: The Workers Who Built the Sears Tower and the Company That Erased Them. The article was devastating. It included interviews with 12 families. It showed copies of the non-disclosure agreements. It presented testimony from 18 former workers who'd been on the Sears Tower construction site. It documented 8 specific deaths with names, dates, and circumstances. The 8 deaths identified were: Carlos Martinez, March 17, 1971, fell 42 stories. Michael O'Malley, November 3, 1971, crushed by falling beam. Thomas Wu, February 15, 1972, fell 68 stories during snowstorm. David Chen, August 22, 1972, fell 40 feet when platform collapsed. John Kowalski, October 8, 1972, fell 55 stories. Raymond Torres, December 1, 1972, crushed by crane accident. Frank Wilson, January 30, 1973, electrocuted. Anthony Rossi, April 12, 1973, fell 89 stories. This list wasn't complete. Other workers mentioned additional deaths they'd witnessed, but couldn't provide specific details about. The real number might have been 12, 15, or even more. Sears issued another denial. They threatened to sue the Chicago Reader. But the Reader had been careful. They'd verified everything with multiple sources. They had copies of documents. They were ready to fight in court. Sears blinked. They didn't sue. Instead, they launched a PR campaign emphasizing their current safety record and their contributions to Chicago. They donated $5 million to the city for a workers' memorial park, which never mentioned the Sears Tower. They hoped the story would go away. It mostly did. The mainstream media barely covered it. Most Chicagoans never heard about it. The tower continued to stand, and tourists continued to visit. But now the truth was out there, documented and recorded. It couldn't be completely erased anymore. The crisis had passed, but the dark story had survived. In 2009, something big happened. The Sears Tower got a new name. Sears, Roebuck and Company had been struggling for years. The rise of Walmart, Target, and online shopping had destroyed their business model. By 2009, Sears was a shadow of its former glory, closing stores, losing money, dying slowly. In 1994, Sears had moved most of its offices out of the tower to a cheaper building in the suburbs. They kept some space but stopped being the main tenant. The building needed a new identity. In March 2009, the London-based Willis Group Holdings, an insurance broker, signed a lease for 140,000 square feet and negotiated a deal. They'd get naming rights. Starting July 16, 2009, the building would officially be called Willis Tower. Chicago hated it. People protested. A Facebook group called Keep the Sears Tower got 50,000 members in 1 week. Local politicians complained. Radio shows ranted about it. Everyone agreed. It would always be the Sears Tower, no matter what some British company wanted to call it. But the name change went through anyway. New signs went up. Tourist brochures changed. Official documents now said Willis Tower. For the families of workers who died building it, the name change felt like another erasure. Their loved ones had died building the Sears Tower. Now even that name was being taken away. Patricia Milligan, Robert Milligan's daughter, told a reporter in 2009, they already erased the workers from history. Now they're erasing the name too. My father died building the Sears Tower. I refuse to call it anything else. The new owners of the building, the Blackstone Group, who'd bought it in 2006 for $1.5 billion, tried to modernize everything. They renovated the skydeck, adding glass ledges that stuck out from the building so tourists could stand on transparent floors and look straight down. The ledges opened in 2009 and became hugely popular. They also updated the historical displays in the lobby. New plaques talked about the building's construction and engineering achievements. But again, not one mentioned worker deaths. The official narrative remained, 0 fatalities. In 2013, a small group of activists, including some family members of dead workers and retired construction workers, tried to get a memorial plaque installed in the building. They submitted a proposal to building management. The plaque would have read, "In memory of the workers who built this tower between 1970 and 1973. Their names are not recorded in official histories, but their labor, skill, and sacrifice made this building possible. They worked in dangerous conditions to create something that would outlast them. We honor their memory." Building management rejected it. Their official response: "We appreciate the sentiment, but we cannot install memorials based on unverified claims." The official construction record shows 0 fatalities. We stand by that record. The rejection made some news, but not much. By 2013, the story was old. Most people had forgotten or never knew in the first place. Meanwhile, the building itself kept evolving. By 2015, it was no longer the world's tallest building. That title had been taken by the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, 17 feet tall. The Willis Tower wasn't even in the top 10 anymore. New super-tall buildings were going up in China, the Middle East, and Asia, but it remained iconic in Chicago. The city's skyline was defined by it. Millions of tourists still visited the skydeck every year, paying $25 per adult ticket to ride to the 103rd floor and look out over the city. The view was still breathtaking. The engineering was still impressive. The building was still a marvel, but for people who knew the real story, visiting the Willis Tower felt haunted. They'd ride the elevator up and think about the workers who'd climbed these heights without elevators, in freezing weather, on narrow beams. They'd stand on the skydeck and imagine what it felt like to fall from this height. Some descendants of dead workers visited the tower as a kind of pilgrimage. Margaret Chen's daughter, Susan, went to the skydeck in 2010. She was 42 years old, visiting the place where her father had died 38 years earlier. She later wrote about it. "I stood on the 103rd floor and tried to imagine him working here. I tried to picture the building half-finished, just steel and concrete and sky. I tried to understand what he felt, what he saw in his last moments. The view was beautiful and terrible, I cried. Other tourists looked at me like I was crazy, crying at such a beautiful sight. They didn't know, nobody knows. The building had transformed from Sears Tower to Willis Tower, from world's tallest to just very tall, from brand new to 40-plus years old. But one thing hadn't transformed: the official denial of worker deaths. The plaque honoring workers was never installed. The names were never recorded. The truth was never officially acknowledged. Sears, the company, barely exists anymore. By 2018, it was bankrupt. The few remaining Sears stores are like museums to a dead retail era. The Sears Tower was their greatest achievement and their most visible legacy, but that legacy was built on lies. And those lies persisted through every transformation, every name change, every new owner. The dark story remained, buried under 110 stories of steel and silence. Today, the Willis Tower, still called Sears Tower by most Chicagoans, stands at 233 South Wacker Drive, dominating the Chicago skyline. It's 51 years old as of 2024. About 15,000 people work in the building. Another 1.7 million tourists visit the skydeck every year. The building has been renovated multiple times. In 2017, a $500 million renovation updated the lobby, added retail space, and modernized office areas. The skydeck keeps getting upgraded with new interactive displays and experiences. But through all these changes, one thing remains constant: the official death count is still zero. In 2020, during the pandemic, a journalist named Marcus Thompson started investigating construction deaths for a podcast called The Invisible Workers. Episode 6 focused entirely on the Sears Tower. Thompson tracked down surviving family members, now elderly themselves. He interviewed retired construction workers in their 70s and 80s who'd worked on the tower. He reviewed union records, hospital records, and death certificates from 1907-1973. He found evidence of at least 11 deaths, possibly as many as 15. But evidence meant testimony, family stories, and circumstantial documentation. There were no smoking guns, no official reports, because those had been destroyed or never existed. One powerful interview was with Jimmy O'Brien, the ironworker mentioned earlier. Now 77 years old, Jimmy had retired from construction in 1995. He developed severe anxiety and PTSD from his years working high steel, especially after what he'd witnessed on the Sears Tower. Jimmy told Thompson, "I watched 3 men fall. I knew 8 guys who died on that job. Every one of them was scrubbed from the records. I was young and scared, and I needed the job, so I kept my mouth shut. But I'm old now. I don't care about NDAs or lawsuits. Those men deserve to be remembered." Carlos Martinez was 31. He had 3 kids. He died, and his family in Mexico never even knew where he was buried. That's evil. That's the real dark story. The podcast got about 200,000 downloads, which was decent but not huge. It didn't change anything officially. The building's owners, Blackstone Group, issued no comment. The city of Chicago, which profits from tourism to the tower, stayed silent. Willis Group Holdings, the insurance company that holds naming rights, ironically makes billions helping companies manage risk and liability. But they've never acknowledged any liability for the deaths that built the building they put their name on. Current construction safety has improved dramatically since the 1970s. OSHA has stricter rules. Harnesses are required. Safety inspections are more frequent. Modern construction sites have better equipment, better training, and stronger enforcement. But workers still die. In 2023, 1,069 construction workers died in the United States. That's about 3 deaths per day. Many deaths still go unreported or are classified in ways that hide the true danger of construction work. High-rise construction remains one of the most dangerous jobs. In 2022, the construction industry had a fatal injury rate of 10.2 deaths per 100,000 workers, compared to 3.6 for all industries combined. And the practice of hiding deaths hasn't completely stopped. In 2019, a New York Times investigation found that construction companies still sometimes pressure families to sign NDAs and accept settlements rather than report deaths officially. The tactics are more sophisticated and legal scrutiny is higher, but the basic pattern continues. The families of Sears Tower workers are mostly gone now. Carlos Martinez's widow died in 2008. Margaret Chen died in 2016. Thomas Wu's parents are long dead. The children of these workers are now in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, but they haven't forgotten. Some have passed the stories down to their own children and grandchildren. The trauma of losing a father or husband, and then having that loss denied and erased, has echoed through generations. Maria Santos, whose father died on the Sears Tower in 1971, is now 72 years old. She still lives in Chicago. She's never been to the skydeck. She can't bring herself to go inside. In a 2023 interview, she said, "I see that building every day of my life. It's impossible to avoid in Chicago. Every time I see it, I think, that's where my father died. That's the thing that killed him, and it's celebrated." People take selfies in front of it. They sell miniature models in gift shops. It's a symbol of the city. But to me, it's a tombstone, and my father's name isn't even on it. The building itself shows its age in small ways. Some exterior panels need replacement. The elevators, though upgraded, are based on 1970s technology. The mechanical systems require constant maintenance. Like all buildings, it's slowly deteriorating, even as renovations keep it functional. Eventually, maybe in 50 or 100 years, the Willis Tower will be demolished. Buildings don't last forever. When that happens, all physical trace of the workers' presence will vanish. The steel they placed will be melted down and recycled. The concrete will be crushed and hauled away. But maybe, by then, the truth will be officially acknowledged. Maybe someone will finally install a memorial. Maybe the names will be recorded before the last family member who remembers them is gone. Or maybe not. Maybe the dark story will stay dark forever. For now, the tower stands. The tourists visit, the workers are forgotten, and the official death count remains 0. Let's talk about who these workers really were. Not statistics, not anonymous victims. Real people with names, families, dreams, and lives cut short. Carlos Martinez was born in Guadalajara, Mexico, in 1940. He learned welding from his uncle and became exceptionally skilled. In 1968, he crossed into the United States looking for better-paying work to support his wife Rosa and their 3 children. Miguel 8, Ana 6, and baby Lucia 2. Carlos got work through a labor contractor who sent Mexican workers to construction sites. The pay was good, $7.50 per hour, better than he could make anywhere in Mexico. He sent most of it home. Rosa used the money to buy food, pay rent, and save for the children's education. Carlos lived in a cramped apartment on Chicago's South Side with 7 other workers. They shared rent, cooked together, and kept each other company. He wrote letters home every week. In one letter from February 1971, he wrote, translated from Spanish, "The work is very high and very cold. Sometimes I am afraid, but I pray and think of you and the children, and I am brave. The building will be the tallest in the world. I am proud to build it. When it is finished, maybe you can come here and I will take you to the top and show you where I worked. From up there you can see everything." Carlos never finished that building. He fell on March 17, 1971, and died instantly. His body was removed within an hour. His belongings were cleared from the apartment he shared. Rosa never received his last paycheck. The letters from Chicago stopped coming. Rosa assumed he'd abandoned her. It was common for men to go north and disappear, starting new lives. She was hurt and angry. She raised 3 children alone, working as a seamstress, struggling constantly. She died in 2008, never knowing her husband hadn't abandoned her. He died building the tallest tower in the world. Miguel Martinez, Carlos's son, was 8 when his father disappeared. He's 62 now, living in Mexico City. In 2015, a researcher tracking Sears Tower deaths contacted him with evidence about how his father really died. Miguel said, "For 44 years, I hated my father for leaving us. I thought he was a coward who ran away. Learning the truth changed everything. He didn't abandon us. He died. And then the company that killed him made him disappear. I'm angry, but differently now. I'm angry at them, not him." Thomas Wu was born in San Francisco in 1948 to Chinese immigrant parents. He was quiet, smart, good with his hands. He became a laborer, doing hard physical work on construction sites. He was saving money to open a restaurant. Thomas was 23 when he went to Chicago for the Sears Tower job. The pay was excellent, and he thought 6 months of work would give him enough to start his business. He wrote to his parents every 2 weeks. On February 15, 1972, during a massive snowstorm, Thomas was carrying materials across a platform on the 68th floor. The wind hit him, the platform shifted. He fell. His body landed in a snowbank and wasn't found for 3 days. The company told his parents he died in a car accident in Indiana. They accepted it because they had no reason to question it. They held a funeral service in San Francisco. Thomas's mother kept his bedroom exactly as he'd left it for 20 years, until she died in 1992. Michael O'Malley was 29, an ironworker from Chicago's Bridgeport neighborhood. His father had been an ironworker. His grandfather had been an ironworker. Michael had a wife, Karen, and a 4-year-old daughter, Bethany. Michael was strong, fearless, and proud of his work. Karen worried constantly. "Please be careful," she'd say every morning. "I'm always careful," he'd reply. On November 3, 1971, a steel beam swung out of control during a crane lift on the 52nd floor. The beam hit Michael and knocked him off the structure. He fell 5 floors before hitting a temporary platform. He died from massive internal injuries. Karen was 27 years old, suddenly a widow with a small child. The company offered her $30,000 to sign papers and stay quiet. She signed. What else could she do? She had rent to pay and a daughter to feed. Bethany O'Malley is 57 now. She barely remembers her father, just scattered images of a big man who lifted her up and made her laugh. She grew up knowing he died in a construction accident, but her mother never told her it was the Sears Tower because she'd signed an NDA. Karen died in 2010. In her belongings, Bethany found the signed agreement and newspaper clippings about the Sears Tower opening. That's how she learned the truth. Bethany visited the Willis Tower in 2012. She rode to the skydeck and stood there crying while tourists took selfies around her. "My dad built this," she told anyone who'd listen. "He died building this and nobody remembers." David Chen was the electrician Margaret Chen's husband, 31 years old, when he fell in August 1972. He was methodical, careful, the kind of worker who triple-checked everything. But when a platform collapsed, care didn't matter. John Kowalski was 35, an ironworker who'd survived 2 tours in Vietnam only to die on the 55th floor of the Sears Tower in October 1972. Raymond Torres was 26, a crane operator crushed when equipment malfunctioned in December 1972. Frank Wilson was 41, an electrician electrocuted in January 1973, leaving behind a wife and 5 children. Anthony Rossi was 24, the youngest victim, an ironworker who fell 89 stories in April 1973, just months before the building opened. Each of these men had families, parents who raised them, wives or girlfriends who loved them, children who needed them, friends who missed them, lives that mattered. But to Sears and Diesel Construction, they were just problems to be managed, evidence to be hidden, numbers to keep at zero. So here we are, more than 50 years after the Sears Tower was built. The truth is out there, documented in podcasts, articles, documentaries, and interviews, but it's still not officially acknowledged. The building's owners have never admitted that workers died. Sears, the company, never apologized. The city of Chicago never demanded accountability. The tourists who visit don't know the real story. This raises hard questions. What do we owe these workers? What does justice look like after 50 years? Is it too late to make things right? Some people say, it happened so long ago. Everyone involved is dead or old. Why dig it up now? What's the point? But the families disagree. They say, our fathers and husbands died building something that millions of people see and use. Their contribution should be recognized. Their names should be remembered. That's not asking too much. In 2021, a group called the Construction Workers Memorial Project started a campaign. Their goal, get an official memorial plaque installed at the Willis Tower acknowledging worker deaths during construction. The proposed plaque would read, between 1970 and 1973, workers built this tower under dangerous conditions. Multiple workers died during construction. Their names were not recorded in official histories, but their labor, courage, and sacrifice made this building possible. We honor their memory and commit to ensuring no worker is ever forgotten again. The campaign collected 12,000 signatures on a petition. They presented it to building management, the city of Chicago, and the Illinois state legislature. Building management said, we cannot install a memorial based on disputed historical claims. The city of Chicago said, this is a private building. We have no authority to require memorials. The state legislature said, we appreciate the sentiment but lack jurisdiction over private property. Every door closed. Frustrated, the memorial project tried a different approach. In May 2022, they installed an unofficial memorial on the sidewalk outside the building, a small brass plaque set into the concrete that read, in memory of the workers who died building this tower, your names are forgotten, but your sacrifice is not. The plaque lasted 3 days before building security removed it. They said it was unauthorized installation on public walkway and a safety hazard. The memorial project tried again. They painted names on the sidewalk in chalk. Carlos Martinez, Thomas Wu, Michael O'Malley, David Chen, John Kowalski, Raymond Torres, Frank Wilson, Anthony Rossi. Rain washed the names away within 24 hours. So the question remains, how do you force the powerful to acknowledge uncomfortable truths? How do you make corporations admit wrongdoing when they have armies of lawyers and decades of plausible deniability? The legal path is essentially closed. The deaths happened 50-plus years ago. The workers who witnessed them are dying off. The documents were destroyed. The NDAs expire when both parties are dead, but proving what happened is nearly impossible now. The moral path is clearer but equally difficult. Morally, the building owners should acknowledge the deaths. They should install a memorial. They should make the truth part of the official history. But corporations don't respond to moral arguments. They respond to money, legal pressure, and public relations threats. Some activists have suggested protests, boycotts of the skydeck, or disruptions to building operations. But these tactics are risky and might backfire, making the activists look like troublemakers instead of truth-tellers. Others have suggested working through unions. The modern construction unions could pressure building management by threatening to refuse maintenance work unless a memorial is installed. But unions today have less power than they did in the 1970s, and they're reluctant to pick fights over historical issues when current worker conditions need attention. A few people have suggested a different approach. Guerrilla memorialization. Create unofficial memorials that can't be removed. Project names onto the building at night using lights. Create a website where families can post stories and photos. Build a virtual memorial that lives forever online, beyond the reach of corporate lawyers. This approach has promise. The internet is harder to censor than physical space. A well-designed website could become the permanent record that the building itself refuses to provide. In 2023, a website called Sears-Tower-Truth.org went live. It lists the names of workers believed to have died during construction. It includes family testimonies, photos when available, and documentation of corporate cover-ups. The site gets about 5,000 visitors per month. It's small but persistent. It exists as a counter-narrative to the official story. But is a website enough? Is digital memory sufficient when the physical building provides no acknowledgement? These are questions without clear answers. What's certain is that time is running out. The children of workers who died are now in their 60s and 70s. Soon they'll be gone too. The last living witnesses to the construction are in their 80s. Within 20 years, everyone with direct memory of these events will be dead. If the truth isn't officially acknowledged soon, it may be lost forever to the realm of rumor and disputed history. Meanwhile, the Willis Tower stands. It's still one of Chicago's defining landmarks. It's still a marvel of engineering. It's still beautiful in its own way, black steel and bronze glass rising into the sky. But it's also a monument to corporate power, to the expendability of workers, to the ease with which the powerful can erase the powerless from history. Every building has a cost. The Sears Tower's cost was human lives. And the second cost, the ongoing cost, is the lie that those lives didn't matter. What the Sears Tower teaches us about power, memory, and truth, we've reached the end of this dark story. You've learned about the workers who died building the Sears Tower. You've learned how their deaths were hidden. You've learned how families were silenced and history was rewritten. Now comes the hardest part. What does this mean? What should we do with this knowledge? Let's start with the basic facts one more time. Between 1970 and 1973, thousands of workers built the tallest building in the world in Chicago. The work was brutally dangerous. Workers climbed higher than anyone had climbed before, in freezing weather, with minimal safety equipment. At least 8 to 15 workers died, possibly more. The company that commissioned the building, Sears, and the companies that built it hid these deaths. They paid families to stay quiet. They destroyed records. They changed death certificates. They created an official narrative, 0 deaths. That narrative has never been officially corrected. This tells us something important about how power works in America. When you're rich and powerful, when you're a corporation like Sears with billions of dollars and armies of lawyers, you can control the story. You can decide what gets remembered and what gets forgotten. You can erase people from history almost as easily as you can erase them from a spreadsheet. The workers who died building the Sears Tower weren't important people. They were immigrants, laborers, regular guys trying to feed their families. Nobody powerful cared if they lived or died. They were replaceable. If one fell, another worker took his place the next day. That's how the powerful have always seen workers, as tools, as resources, as costs on a balance sheet. But here's what they forget. Workers are people. They have names. They have families who love them. They have value beyond their labor. Carlos Martinez wasn't just a welder. He was a husband who wrote love letters to his wife, a father who dreamed of taking his children to see the building he helped create, a human being with hopes and fears and a life that mattered. When he died, the world lost something irreplaceable, and when Sears hid his death, they committed a second murder, the murder of his memory. This is the real dark story of the Sears Tower. Not just that workers died, workers die on construction sites all the time, tragically, but that their deaths were deliberately erased, that their families were silenced, that their names were stolen from history. Today, the Willis Tower stands as one of Chicago's most beloved landmarks. On a clear day, 4,000 people visit the skydeck. They press their faces against the glass. They take photos. They marvel at the view and the engineering. Most have no idea they're standing on hidden graves. This should bother us, not because we need to stop enjoying the building, but because we should know what it cost. We should know who paid the price. We should insist that their names be remembered. Imagine if there was a plaque in the lobby that said, "This building was constructed between 1970 and 1973 by thousands of skilled workers. Multiple workers died during construction, including Carlos Martinez, Thomas Wu, Michael O'Malley, David Chen, John Kowalski, Raymond Torres, Frank Wilson, and Anthony Rossi. We honor their memory and the sacrifice they made to create this landmark. Would that ruin the building? Would it make it less impressive? No, it would make it more impressive because it would tell the full truth. It would acknowledge that great achievements require great sacrifices, and the people who make those sacrifices deserve to be remembered. But the building's owners refused to install such a plaque because it would imply liability. It would suggest that maybe the deaths weren't accidents. It would open the door to questions they don't want to answer. So the silence continues. Here's a question for you to think about. What will you do with this knowledge? You now know the dark story of the Sears Tower. You know that workers died and were erased from history. You know that corporations hide uncomfortable truths. You know that power protects itself by controlling memory. So what now? You could forget this story. Close this script and move on with your life. Let it fade from your memory like chalk names washed away by rain. Or you could remember. You could tell others. You could refuse to accept the official narrative. You could insist that truth matters, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's old, even when the powerful want it buried. This might seem small. What difference does it make if you remember Carlos Martinez's name? He's been dead for 53 years. Remembering him won't bring him back. It won't change the past. But memory is powerful. Memory is how we resist erasure. Memory is how we insist that ordinary people matter as much as buildings and corporations. Every time you look at a skyscraper, you could think, who built this? Who died building this? Are they remembered? Every time you hear about a construction accident, you could think, will this worker's death be hidden? Will their family be pressured to stay quiet? Every time a corporation claims a perfect safety record, you could think, is that really true? Or is it just what they want us to believe? This kind of critical thinking, this refusal to accept official narratives without question, is how we create accountability. Let me end with a story that brings this full circle. In 2019, a woman named Sofia Martinez visited Chicago. She was 35 years old, a teacher from Guadalajara, Mexico. She went to the Willis Tower and rode to the skydeck because she'd heard it was famous and beautiful. While standing there, looking out over the city, she overheard a tour guide talking about how the building was constructed in record time with a perfect safety record. Something made her uncomfortable. She'd grown up hearing stories from her grandmother Rosa about her grandfather Carlos, who'd gone to Chicago in the 1970s and never returned. The family had always assumed he'd abandoned them. Sofia did research. She found the Chicago Reader article from 1997. She found the podcast from 2020. She found the Sears-Tower-Truth.org website. She found her grandfather's name, Carlos Martinez. Died March 17, 1971, age 31. Fell 42 stories while welding on the Sears Tower. Sofia cried for days. Her whole family's understanding of their history changed in an instant. Carlos hadn't abandoned them. He died trying to provide for them. And then he'd been erased. Sofia started a blog documenting her search for the truth about her grandfather. She connected with other descendants of workers who died. She became an activist for construction worker safety and historical accountability. She wrote, "My grandfather built something that still stands 50 years later. Millions of people have seen it, but nobody knows his name. Nobody remembers his sacrifice. This is wrong. I won't let him stay forgotten." This is the human echo. Sofia's grandfather has been dead for 53 years, but his story continues to ripple forward, affecting new generations, creating new activists, keeping the truth alive. This is why memory matters. This is why we can't let the powerful control the story. The Sears Tower, the Willis Tower, is still there, 233 South Wacker Drive, Chicago. It's 1,450 feet tall, 110 stories, black steel and bronze glass reaching into the sky. It's beautiful. It's impressive. It's a testament to human ambition and engineering genius. But it's also a tomb, a monument built on hidden graves, a dark story that refuses to stay buried. The workers who died building it deserve better than corporate silence and forced forgetting. They deserve their names on a plaque. They deserve to be part of the official history. They deserve to be remembered. Until that happens, the Willis Tower will always be incomplete. Not architecturally. The structure is solid and will stand for decades more. But morally, ethically, truthfully, a building without the truth is just a very tall lie.